The manor on Blackwood Hill had stood empty for 47 years before the lights returned. Villagers in the valley below noticed them first, pale amber glows drifting past windows that had been dark since before most of them were born. They crossed themselves and hurried their children indoors, remembering the stories their grandmothers had whispered about the family who once lived there. Stories of a lord who never aged, of a wife who vanished into the mist one autumn evening and was never seen again. They did not know that the lord had returned because he had nowhere else to bring her. Valdric Ashwood, king of the Carpathian courts for 7 centuries, carried his wife across the threshold of the home they had shared in another lifetime. She weighed almost nothing now, a sparrow's weight, a handful of autumn leaves, a sigh made flesh. Her skin had gone translucent, showing the map of her veins like rivers beneath ice, and her eyes, once the warm brown of chestnuts in firelight, had faded to the color of winter fog. He laid her on the bed they had shared during those brief, blazing years when she was still mortal, and he had been foolish enough to believe that love could outrun time. "You should have left me in Vienna," Seraphina whispered. Her voice came from very far away, as though she were already speaking from the other side of some veil he could not see. "The physicians there could do nothing." Valdric smoothed the silver hair back from her forehead. It had been black as a raven's wing when he first saw her, 234 years ago, laughing at a fountain in Prague. "No physician can cure what ails you, my heart. I thought perhaps here, where we were happy." He did not finish. Could not. The curse that was killing her had no name. It had come upon her slowly over the past decade, a dimming of the immortal flame he had given her on their wedding night. She should have been eternal. She should have walked beside him until the stars burned out. Instead, she was fading like a photograph left too long in sunlight, her very essence unraveling thread by golden thread. Valdric had consulted every ancient text, every elder vampire, every witch and seer and scholar of the arcane. He had offered fortunes. He had offered blood. He had offered his own immortality, his crown, his very soul, for the knowledge that might save her. No one knew the cause. No one knew the cure. He sat beside her bed in the darkness, holding her hand that felt like paper, like the wings of moths, like something that might crumble if he pressed too hard. The grandfather clock in the hall below marked the hours with the same slow patience it had shown for centuries, and Valdric counted each strike like a heartbeat he wished he still possessed. He had been a king for 700 years. He had commanded armies of the night, ruled over courts of immortals who bowed before his ancient power, drunk from the throats of emperors and revolutionaries alike. He had watched empires rise and fall like tides, had seen humanity progress from swords to guns to machines that flew through the sky, had accumulated more wealth and knowledge than any single mind should hold. None of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered, not really, except for the woman lying in this bed, slipping away from him like water through his fingers. "You're brooding," Seraphina murmured, and even now, even at the edge of dissolution, there was a ghost of her old humor in the words. "I can hear you brooding. It's very loud." "I am a vampire king. I do not brood. I contemplate." "You contemplate very loudly, then." Her fingers twitched against his palm. She was trying to squeeze his hand. "Valdric, my love, you need to let me go." "No. I've had 2 centuries more than any mortal woman could dream of. 2 centuries of loving you, of being loved by you. That's more than enough. It will never be enough." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her cold knuckles. "Not if we had until the ending of the world." She smiled then, a fragile thing, a crack in ancient porcelain. "Then I suppose it's good that we won't. Some things are too precious to last forever. Some things are meant to teach us what we're living for, and then leave, so we remember why it matters." "I don't want to remember. I want you. You'll have me." Her eyes fluttered closed. "You'll always have me, just not like this, not in this form. I'll be in the wind through these windows, my darling. I'll be in the moonlight on your skin. I'll be in every beautiful thing that ever made you stop and wonder. That's what love does. It becomes everything." He did not answer because there was nothing to say that wouldn't break the fragile peace she was trying to build for herself. So he sat and he held her hand and he watched the darkness deepen around them and he waited for the end of all things. The hospice nurse arrived the next morning. Valdric had not arranged for one, had not even considered it. The world of the living, with its agencies and services and bureaucratic tangles, had grown foreign to him over the centuries. But the village had remembered. Someone had called someone who called someone else. And now there was a small blue car climbing the winding road to Blackwood Hill, its headlights cutting through the morning mist like tiny brave torches against the gloom. He watched from the window of the master bedroom, his skin itching with the daylight that crept around the heavy curtains. He should send her away. He should glamour the village into forgetting the house existed, seal the gates, vanish with Seraphina into some deeper darkness where death could find them undisturbed. But Seraphina had woken at dawn, more lucid than she had been in weeks, and had asked, had begged for someone human to talk to. "I miss them," she had whispered. "I miss their warmth, their chaos, their beautiful brevity. I was one of them once, remember? Before you made me this. I want to hear a human voice again. I want to smell coffee and skin and life." He could deny her nothing. He had never been able to deny her anything. So he watched the nurse climb out of her car, young, perhaps 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, and a face that held the particular sort of tired kindness that came from witnessing too much suffering and still choosing to return each day. She looked up at the manor with an expression that was half wonder, half wariness, and something in the set of her shoulders told Valdric that she would not be easily frightened away. Her name was Elena Morrow. He learned this when she stepped through the front door that he had unlocked remotely, calling out a soft hello into the dusty silence of the entrance hall. She carried a medical bag in one hand and a thermos in the other, and she did not flinch when he materialized from the shadows at the foot of the stairs, though her heartbeat spiked in a way that any predator would have noticed. "You must be Mr. Ashwood," she said, and her voice was steady. "I'm Elena from the county hospice service. Someone called about a patient who needed end-of-life care." "My wife!" The word scraped against his throat. "She's upstairs." Elena nodded, all business, but her eyes lingered on his face for a moment, taking in the paleness of his skin, perhaps, or the unnatural stillness of his features. "I understand this is difficult. I'll need to assess her condition, go over her needs, establish a care plan. Is there anyone else who can be here to support you? Family? Friends?" "There is no one else. There has been no one else for a very long time." Something flickered in her expression. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition. "All right, then it's just us. Can you show me to her?" He led her up the grand staircase, past portraits of ancestors who had never existed, props he'd acquired over the centuries to maintain the illusion of humanity, and down the long corridor to the master bedroom. Elena walked beside him without hesitation, her sneakers silent on the thick carpet, her medical bag swinging gently with each step. When they entered the room, Seraphina was awake. She had managed to prop herself up against the pillows, her silver hair spread around her like a halo, her translucent skin glowing faintly in the soft light that crept through the curtains. She looked like a ghost already, like something between worlds, but her eyes were clear and bright, with an eagerness that made Valdric's dead heart ache. "You're the nurse," Seraphina said, and her voice was stronger than it had been in days. "Oh, look at you. Look at your freckles. I used to have freckles, you know, before I became this. Valdric, look at her freckles." Elena smiled, and Valdric watched something warm kindle in her tired eyes. "Mrs. Ashwood, it's lovely to meet you. I'm Elena." "Elena, what a beautiful name. Greek, isn't it? The shining light." Seraphina reached out a trembling hand. "Come, sit with me. Tell me everything. Tell me about the village, about your life, about the world outside these walls. I've been away from it for so long." And Elena did. She sat at Seraphina's bedside and talked about ordinary things, the cafe on the high street that made the best scones, the old churchyard where she liked to walk on her lunch breaks, the rescue cat named Fitzgerald who had claimed her apartment as his kingdom. She talked about her mother, who had passed 3 years ago from the same illness she now helped others face, and about how that loss had led her to this work. "I couldn't save her," Elena said, her voice quiet and honest. "But I could sit with her. I could hold her hand and tell her she wasn't alone. And I thought, if I could do that for other people, for strangers, maybe her death would mean something. Maybe it would become a door instead of a wall." Valdric stood in the corner of the room, wrapped in shadows, and listened to this mortal woman speak of death and meaning with the same ease that his kind spoke of blood and eternity. He watched the color return to Seraphina's cheeks, not the flush of health, but the glow of genuine connection, of joy, and something stirred in the frozen depths of his chest, something that felt almost like hope. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm. Elena came each morning and left each evening, bringing with her the scent of the outside world, autumn leaves and wood smoke, and the particular crispness of air that had never known the staleness of a vampire's lair. She bathed Seraphina with gentle hands, changed her sheets, adjusted her pillows, monitored the vital signs that had grown so faint they barely registered on her equipment. But it was not the medical care that transformed those final weeks. It was the presence, the companionship, the way Elena treated Seraphina not as a patient to be managed, but as a person to be known. She brought books and read aloud, while Seraphina dozed, poetry mostly. Keats and Shelley and the romantics who had written about beauty and death with the same fevered intensity that vampires felt in their blood. She brought music, playing old records on a turntable she'd found in the attic, and the manor filled with sounds it hadn't heard in half a century. Chopin, Debussy, the kind of melancholy beauty that made even immortal hearts ache. She brought flowers from the village garden, crowding the windowsills with chrysanthemums and late roses until the room smelled of life instead of decay. And she talked. Lord, how she talked. She told Seraphina about her childhood in the countryside, about the grandmother who had taught her to read tea leaves and speak to the dead, about the boyfriend in nursing school who had left her for someone shinier and less serious. She told her about the patients she had lost and the ones she had saved, and the ones who still visited her dreams, asking for things she couldn't give them. In return, Seraphina told her stories that spanned centuries. She spoke of Prague in the 1700s, of balls and intrigues, and the young lord who had watched her from across a crowded room with eyes that burned like black flame. She spoke of their courtship, of stolen kisses in moonlit gardens, of the night he had finally confessed what he was and offered her a choice, a mortal lifetime at his side, or an eternity. "I chose eternity," Seraphina whispered one evening when the light had gone soft and Elena sat curled in the armchair by the bed, wrapped in a blanket she'd brought from home. "I was young and in love, and I thought forever meant forever. I didn't know that even eternity has endings." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" "Never." Seraphina's faded eyes found Valdric in his corner of shadows, and she smiled. "Not for a single moment, even now, even as I fade. How could I regret the chance to love him for 200 years? How could I regret the things I've seen, the places I've been, the life I've lived? Most people get 80 years if they're lucky, and they spend half of them asleep. I got 2 centuries of being awake, of being alive, really alive, with every sense heightened and every moment crystallized like a diamond in my memory. You're not afraid of what comes next?" "I'm curious." Seraphina reached out and took Elena's hand. "Isn't that strange? After all this time, there's still something I haven't experienced. One last adventure, one final door to walk through." Her grip tightened, fragile but fierce. "Promise me something, Elena." "Anything. Promise me you'll look after him when I'm gone." Her eyes flickered to the shadows where Valdric stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. "He pretends to be made of stone, but he's not. He's the most human creature I've ever known, for all that he hasn't been human for 700 years. He'll try to close himself off again, to disappear into the darkness. Don't let him. Promise me." Elena turned to look at Valdric, really look at him for the first time since she'd arrived. He felt her gaze like sunlight on his skin, burning through the layers of pretense and protection he had built up over the centuries. "I promise," she said. The truth came out on a night when the moon was full, and Seraphina had slipped into a sleep so deep it was nearly indistinguishable from death. Valdric found Elena on the terrace, wrapped in her coat, staring up at the stars with an expression that suggested she was asking them questions they would never answer. He had not meant to join her, had not meant to do anything but drift through the empty halls like the ghost he was becoming, but something drew him to her presence, some gravity he did not understand. "You're not human," Elena said without turning around. Her voice was calm, curious, utterly without fear. "Neither of you." He could have denied it, could have glamored her, erased her memories, sent her back to the village, with no recollection of anything she had seen. It would have been the smart thing to do, the safe thing, but Seraphina had trusted her, and Valdric, against all his instincts, found that he trusted her too. "No," he said, "we are not." Elena turned then, and he saw that her eyes were wet with tears she hadn't let herself shed. How long have you been, whatever you are?" "I have walked this earth for 743 years. Seraphina, 234. He moved to stand beside her at the stone balustrade, looking out over the valley that glittered with the lights of a village he had watched grow from a handful of cottages to a proper town. "I was made in the mountains of Carpathia by a creature so old he had forgotten his own name. I was a knight once, a lord, a king of my kind. I have been many things over the centuries. Now I am just a man watching his wife die. But you're immortal. How can she be dying? A curse." The word tasted like poison. "Ancient magic, older even than my maker. It found her somehow, wormed its way into the gift I gave her, and began to unravel it thread by thread. The elders say it has no cure. They say she was never meant to carry immortality, that some souls are too bright to burn forever, and the universe has come to claim its debt. Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. That's why you came here, to the house where you were happy. I wanted her last days to be filled with memories of joy, of the life we built together, before the world became too heavy to bear. He looked down at his hands, pale, strong, capable of crushing stone or catching bullets, utterly powerless to save the woman he loved. I have failed her, Elena. I promised her eternity, and I have failed. You haven't failed. Elena turned to face him fully, and there was a fierceness in her tired eyes that made her look almost otherworldly herself. You've given her 2 centuries of love. You've given her a death surrounded by beauty and tenderness instead of cold hospital rooms and beeping machines. You've given her you, still here, still fighting, still refusing to let her go alone into whatever darkness waits. It's not enough. It never is. Her voice cracked. Believe me, I know. I sat with my mother for 6 months, watching her fade, and I thought the same thing every single day. Nothing I did was enough. Nothing could make it better, or easier, or fair. But I was there. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the curing, but the caring. Not the saving, but the staying. Something in Valdric's chest shattered, a wall he hadn't known he was still maintaining, a dam holding back centuries of grief. He turned away so she wouldn't see his face, but there was no hiding from Elena Morrow. She had the kind of eyes that saw through everything. You're crying? She said softly, wonderingly. I didn't think vampires could cry. We're not supposed to. Words came out raw, broken. Another failure to add to the list. She laughed then, a small, sad sound, and reached out to touch his arm. Her hand was warm, impossibly warm, and he found himself leaning into it like a man who had been cold for 700 years. It's not a failure, she said. It's proof that you're still alive. Whatever else you are, you're still alive. The hunters came 3 nights later. Valdric sensed them before he saw them, the particular tension in the air that came from mortals who had been trained to kill his kind. 3 of them, approaching through the forest with silver-tipped crossbow bolts and prayers on their lips and the righteous certainty that they were doing God's work. He should have killed them. It would have been easy, even weakened as he was by weeks of grief and hunger. He could have torn them apart in the darkness before they ever reached the house, left their bodies for the wolves and the ravens, protected what remained of his sanctuary. But Elena was still there, asleep in the guest room down the hall, and Seraphina was stirring, her faded eyes opening to fix on some distant point that Valdric could not see. They're coming, she whispered. I can feel them, the ones who hate what we are. I'll protect you. No. Her voice was stronger than it had been in weeks, burning with something that was not quite life and not quite death, but something in between. No more killing Valdric, not in my name, not ever in my name. They'll destroy us both. Then let them. She reached for his hand, and her grip was ice and fire, and everything he had ever loved about her. I'm dying anyway, my love. Let me die clean. Let me die without more blood on our hands. Please. The hunters reached the house as dawn was breaking. 3 men with hard eyes and harder hearts, carrying weapons that had been blessed and cursed and dipped in holy water. Valdric met them at the front door, unarmed, uncloaked, offering no resistance when they pressed a silver cross to his chest and watched his skin smoke and char. We know what you are, their leader said. The village has known for years. They thought you were gone, thought the evil had finally left this place. But you came back, didn't you? You always come back. I came back to let my wife die in peace. Valdric held the man's gaze, ignoring the agony of silver against his flesh. She was human once. She still has a human soul. All I ask is that you let her pass in her own time, without violence. After that, you can do what you will with me. The hunter's eyes narrowed. You expect us to believe that? A monster like you, capable of mercy? I expect nothing from you. Valdric's voice was calm, ancient, carrying the weight of 7 centuries. I stopped expecting anything from mortals a very long time ago. But I'm asking, for her sake, not mine, give her the dignity of a peaceful death. Something shifted in the hunter's expression. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first, faint stirring of doubt. He looked past Valdric into the shadowed interior of the manor, and his grip on his crossbow loosened ever so slightly. Show me, he said. Show me the woman you claim to love. Valdric led them upstairs. Elena was there when they arrived, standing at Seraphina's bedside like a guardian angel, her medical bag open, her hands steady despite the fear that Valdric could smell rolling off her in waves. She looked at the hunters with their weapons and their crosses and their absolute conviction, and she stepped forward to put herself between them and her patient. "Whatever you think you know," she said, "this woman is dying. She's been dying for weeks. All I've done is try to make her comfortable, to give her whatever dignity I can before the end. If you have any humanity left in you at all, you'll let her go in peace." The lead hunter stared at her. "You know what she is? What he is? I know what she is right now. She's a woman who's scared and tired and ready to rest. She's a wife whose husband has been at her side every single day, holding her hand, reading to her, refusing to let her face the darkness alone." Elena's voice cracked, but she didn't back down. "I've spent 3 years watching people die. I know death, and I know love. What's in this room right now is love, pure and simple. Whatever else they've been, whatever else they've done, right now they're just 2 people at the end of a story, and they deserve to finish it without violence." The silence stretched on for what felt like years. Then Seraphina spoke, her voice a whisper of wind through dead leaves. "I remember you, Marcus Thorne, your great-great-grandfather. He tried to kill my husband in Vienna in 1847. Valdric spared him, sent him home to his wife and children with nothing but a warning never to return. The hunter, Marcus, went pale. That's impossible. How could you? I remember all of them. Every hunter who has come for us over the centuries. The ones who died fighting, and the ones who lived, because my husband showed them mercy they would never have shown him." Seraphina's faded eyes fixed on Marcus's face with an intensity that seemed to cost her everything she had left. "He is not a monster. He was once long ago, but I unmade that creature. I spent 200 years teaching him that love was stronger than hunger, that mercy was braver than murder. If you kill him now, you won't be destroying a monster. You'll be destroying the best of him, the parts I built, the parts I'm leaving behind." She reached out a trembling hand, and Valdric took it, falling to his knees beside her bed. He didn't care that the hunters could see him cry, could see him broken open like a wound that would never heal. He didn't care about anything except the feel of her hand in his and the precious few breaths she had left to take. "Let him live," Seraphina whispered. "Please, if you have any honor, any mercy, any love in your hearts for the people you're trying to protect, let him live. He's going to need someone to watch over him when I'm gone. He's going to need a reason to stay." Her eyes found Elena's across the room. "Promise me," she said again. "Promise me you'll give him a reason to stay." Elena was crying now, tears streaming down her freckled cheeks, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I promise." Seraphina smiled, one last smile, radiant and fierce and full of a joy that had no right to exist in a dying woman's face. "Good," she breathed. "Good." And then she was gone. The light went out of her eyes between one heartbeat and the next. A candle snuffed by an invisible wind, a star falling into the dark between worlds. Valdric felt it happen like a physical blow, a severing of something that had connected them across 2 centuries and countless miles, and all the weight of the world. He heard himself make a sound that was not quite human, a howl of grief that rattled the windows and made the hunters step back in fear. He gathered Seraphina's body in his arms, cradling her against his chest, rocking her like a child, while the sun climbed higher outside and his skin began to smoke where the light touched it. He didn't care. He would have burned alive if it meant holding her for one more moment. It was Elena who saved him. She crossed the room and drew the curtains closed, plunging the room back into darkness. Then she turned to the hunters, who stood frozen in the doorway, their weapons forgotten in their hands. "Get out," she said. "All of you. Get out of this house, out of this village, out of his life. He's not a threat to anyone except himself right now. And if you have any decency at all, you'll let him grieve in peace." "We can't just," Marcus began. "You can. You will." Elena's voice could have cut glass. "That woman just died asking you for mercy. Are you going to spit on her last wish?" The hunters looked at each other, looked at Valdric, folded around his wife's body like a man drowning, looked at Elena, standing between them like a wall of flame. "We'll be watching," Marcus said finally. "If he hurts anyone." "He won't." Elena's eyes never wavered. "Now go." They went. The weeks that followed were the longest of Valdric's existence. He buried Seraphina in the garden she had loved, beneath the ancient oak tree where they had married 2 centuries ago. He spoke no words over her grave. What words could possibly contain what she had meant to him? but he planted roses there, red as blood, and promised himself that he would tend them for as long as he walked the earth. Then he retreated into the darkness of the manor and waited to die. Vampires could not simply will themselves out of existence. Their bodies were too stubborn, too ancient, too deeply rooted in the fabric of the world. But they could starve. They could refuse to feed, to move, to engage with the world outside their grief, and eventually, the flame that animated them would gutter and go out. Valdric intended to do exactly that, but Elena would not let him. She came every day just as she had when Seraphina was alive. She brought blood bags from the hospital, stolen he suspected, though he never asked, and left them on his bedside table without comment. She opened the curtains just enough to remind him that the sun still existed. She read aloud from books he had loved centuries ago, and she talked to him about ordinary things, about her cat and her garden, and the strange peace she had found in a village that harbored a vampire. She did not ask him to respond. She did not demand anything from him at all. She simply stayed, day after day, a constant presence in the darkness, a warm flame refusing to be extinguished. "Why?" he asked her one evening, the first word he had spoken in 3 weeks. His voice was a ruin, cracked and broken from disuse. Elena looked up from the book she was reading. Shelley, because of course it was Shelley, and considered the question. "Because I promised her I would," she said simply. "And because you're not ready to go yet. Not really, you still have work to do." "What work? What possible purpose could I have, now that she's gone?" "The same purpose you've always had." Elena closed her book and leaned forward, her eyes bright in the dim light. "To prove that immortality doesn't have to mean monstrosity. To show that love can change anything, even a creature made of darkness and hunger. She spent 200 years building something beautiful in you, Valdric. Are you really going to let all of that disappear just because she's not here to see it anymore?" He had no answer. Or rather, he had too many answers, all of them tangled together in a grief so vast it defied navigation. Elena stood and crossed to his bedside, where the blood bags lay untouched. She picked one up and held it out to him, her hand steady, her expression implacable. "Drink," she said, "live, and when you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next together." He looked at her, this mortal woman who had walked into his life and refused to leave, who had kept a promise to a dying stranger, who saw the monster and the man in him and chose to believe in the man. He thought of Seraphina, of the 2 centuries she had spent teaching him to be better than his nature. He thought of all the years still stretching ahead of him, empty and dark and waiting to be filled. And he drank. The change came upon Elena so gradually that neither of them noticed it at first. It began as a dream, a vision of herself in Seraphina's garden, surrounded by roses that bloomed in impossible colors, listening to a voice she couldn't quite hear, whispering secrets about the nature of eternity. She woke from these dreams feeling different, though she couldn't have said how. More awake, more alive, more attuned to the rhythms of the night. Then she started seeing the dead. It was her grandmother first, appearing at the foot of her bed one midnight, smiling that knowing smile she'd always had, mouthing words that Elena could almost understand. Then her mother, standing in the kitchen doorway, looking healthier and happier than she'd ever been in life. Then others, strangers, spirits drawn to her presence like moths to a lamp, crowding the edges of her vision with their silent pleas. She told Valdric because by then she told him everything. He listened without surprise, without judgment, without any of the dismissiveness she might have expected. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire that burned in the hearth she had convinced him to light. "Seraphina gave you a gift," he said finally. "The night she died, when she asked you to promise, when she looked at you with those eyes that had seen 2 centuries of magic and wonder, she gave you something, a piece of herself, the part of her that always believed in the impossible." "What does that mean?" Elena whispered. "It means you're becoming something new. Not vampire, not witch, not any creature with a name that I know. Something in between. Something that can walk the line between life and death, between the mortal world and the immortal one, and belong to both." Is that dangerous?" Valdric turned to look at her, and for the first time since Seraphina's death, something like warmth flickered in his ancient eyes. "Everything worth having is dangerous, Elena. Every choice that matters carries risk. The question is not whether it's dangerous, the question is whether it's worth it." She thought about that. Thought about the dead who came to her now, seeking comfort, seeking closure, seeking a voice to carry their messages to the living they'd left behind. Thought about Valdric, slowly returning to himself, slowly finding reasons to engage with a world that had become too painful to bear. Thought about Seraphina, radiant even in death, choosing to spend her last breath on an act of faith. "Will you teach me?" she asked. How to be this new thing? How to walk between worlds without losing myself? Valdric smiled, an expression she had never seen on his face before, but recognized immediately from the stories Seraphina had told her. The smile of a man who had been given a purpose. I will teach you everything I know, he said, and together we will learn everything I don't. Years passed, then decades. Elena aged, but slowly, far more slowly than any mortal woman should. The gift Seraphina had given her burned in her veins like a banked fire, extending her life, enhancing her senses, connecting her to the spirit world in ways that grew stronger with each passing year. She became a bridge between the living and the dead, a voice for those who had no voice, a comfort to those facing the darkness that awaited everyone in the end. She traveled the world with Valdric, learning the secret histories of vampires and ghosts and all the creatures that walked the night. She helped him rebuild the connections he had let. Decay during his centuries of isolation, and in doing so, built a place for herself in a world she had never known existed. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite realizing it, friendship became something more. It was nothing like his love for Seraphina could never be, would never be. That had been a blaze, a conflagration, two souls consuming each other in a fire that burned for 2 centuries. This was something quieter, something warmer, something that crept up on them like dawn after the longest night. Elena was 87 years old when Valdric finally asked her the question. They were sitting in Seraphina's garden, surrounded by roses that had bloomed without fail for 5 decades, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. Elena's hair had gone silver, her face had softened with age, but her eyes were still the same, bright, curious, fearless, and her hand in Valdric's felt exactly as warm as it had that first night on the terrace. I could give you what I gave her, he said quietly. True immortality. The same gift, the same curse. You would never age, never die, never have to leave this world until you chose to. Elena was silent for a long moment. And the curse that killed her, the unraveling? It took her because she was never meant for immortality. Her soul was too bright, too human, too connected to the mortal world. Valdric squeezed her hand. But you're already something else. You've spent 50 years walking between worlds, carrying pieces of both inside you. The immortality would be different for you. Stable, lasting. You don't know that for certain. No, I don't. Nothing is certain, Elena. Not in life, not in death, not in whatever lies between. He turned to face her, and she saw the centuries in his eyes, the grief and the joy, the loss and the love, all the weight of 700 years of existence. But I know this. I don't want to watch you die. I've done that once already, and it nearly destroyed me. The thought of doing it again... He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Elena reached up and touched his face, pale and cold and beautiful, the face of a king and a monster, and a man who had spent 200 years learning how to love. She thought of Seraphina, who had chosen eternity without hesitation and never regretted it for a moment. She thought of her mother, who had died too young and left behind a daughter who would carry her loss forever. She thought of all the spirits she had guided over the years, the peaceful ones and the restless ones, the ones who were ready to move on and the ones who clung to the world with desperate hands. She thought about what it meant to be alive, what it meant to love, what it meant to choose. Not yet, she said, but ask me again, in a few years, in a few decades, when I'm ready to make that choice without fear, without doubt, without anything but certainty. Valdric closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright, with something that might have been tears. I'll ask you as many times as you need to hear it, he said. I'll ask you every night for 100 years, if that's what it takes. Because you gave me something when you walked through that door all those years ago. Something I thought I had lost forever when Seraphina died. What? Hope. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had kissed Seraphina's hand in the darkness of her deathbed. You gave me hope. And whatever you choose, Elena, mortal life or immortal eternity, I will spend every moment I have left making sure you never regret a single second of the time we've shared. Elena smiled, a smile that was entirely her own, and yet carried echoes of another woman's warmth, another woman's fierce joy, another woman's absolute certainty that love was worth any price. Then let's not waste a moment, she said. We have forever to decide about eternity, but right now the stars are beautiful, and the roses are blooming, and you still haven't told me the story of how you met the Queen of England in 1842. Valdric laughed, a sound that startled him, that he hadn't made in decades, that rang out across the moonlit garden like a bell calling the faithful to worship. "Which one?" he asked. "I've met several, you know." "All of them," Elena said. "We have time." And they did. In the end, that was Seraphina's true gift. Not the touch of immortality she had left in Elena's blood, not the dying wish that had kept Valdric from destroying himself, but the simple, profound truth she had understood from the beginning. Love doesn't end. It transforms. It becomes the wind through an open window, the moonlight on pale skin, the roses that bloom year after year in a garden where two women had stood at different times and loved the same impossible man. It becomes the courage to let go and the strength to hold on, the wisdom to accept what cannot be changed, and the hope to believe that some things, the important things, last forever. Seraphina had known that, had lived it for 2 centuries, and then had given it away with her last breath, trusting that the woman who received it would carry it forward into whatever future awaited. And Elena did. She carried it through the years that followed, through joy and sorrow, and all the ordinary miracles that made up an extraordinary life. She carried it when she finally said yes to Valdric's question, when she crossed that threshold into a new existence and felt her mortal life fall away like a chrysalis she had finally outgrown. She carried it through the centuries that followed, walking at his side through a world that changed around them while they remained constant, eternal, together. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she would stand in Seraphina's garden and listen to the wind through the roses, and she could almost hear a voice, warm and wise and full of impossible joy, whispering secrets about love and death and the beautiful, terrible, miraculous gift of being alive. "The story continues," the voice seemed to say. "It always continues. That's what stories do. That's what love does. It becomes everything.